7, 13 to 14, where our first scripture reading comes from, and then afterwards we will turn to Romans 3, 19 through 24. Matthew 7, 13 to 14 can be found on page 1506 of the Bibles in front of you, page 1506. This is a short segment from Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, where he says, "Enter through the narrow gate, for wide is the gate, and broad is the road that leads to destruction, and many enter through it. But small is the gate, and narrow the road that leads to life, and only a few find it." And then to Romans 3, 19 to 24, which is on page 1750 to 1751 of the Bibles in front of you. Romans 3, 19 to 24, where Paul says, "Now we know that whatever the law says, it says to those who are under the law, so that every mouth may be silenced and the whole world held accountable to God. Therefore, no one will be declared righteous in his sight by observing the law. Rather, through the law we become conscious of our sin. But now a righteousness from God, apart from the law, has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testify. This righteousness from God comes through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference, for all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus." This is God's word.
Thanks be to God.
If you would please join me in a word of prayer. Holy Spirit, we ask that you come and fill this place to be with us. Make us aware of your presence, and prepare us to hear from what you have to say. Prepare us to be changed. God, as we come in here with our anxieties, our fears, our shame, our guilt, our secrets, God, we put all of those aside. We give them to you. And with our hands open, now that we've let all those things go, God, help us to receive the good news, the grace, and the gifts that you have for us. Amen. I want to start today by telling you guys all a little bit about my grandpa. When I was younger, my grandpa was one of my heroes. You know, I looked up to him. I just thought he was one of the coolest guys ever. He had this old El Camino truck/car thing that he would let us kids ride in the back of it when we were young and when you're 6 years old. That's like the coolest thing ever. He grew up on a farm in Iowa, so he just has this really awesome, down-to-earth personality. He's hardworking, he's a man of integrity, he's honest, he's somebody that I always looked up to. And another thing about my grandpa was that he was in the United States Marine Corps. And so when I was a kid, I always thought that was so cool. And he would tell us stories about how hard the training was, about how you have to run like 10 miles carrying a 50-pound sack, have to do all these obstacle courses. And when we were younger, we would watch TV, there would be this ad for the Marines that would come on, and it had this slogan that you might remember, and you could say it with me if you know it, but it's the few, the proud, the Marines. You have to be the best of the best to be in the Marines. You have to do some really rigorous training. And I can't help but think of that slogan every time that I read Matthew 7, where it talks about the wide and the narrow gates and how only the few will enter it. And it makes me think, like, is this only for the best of the best? Is the Christian life like this Marine boot camp where you have to work really hard and there's all these obstacles that you have to go through, and a lot of people aren't going to make it? Only the few, only the best, only the proud are going to be able to make it. And is that what Jesus is saying here? Is he telling his followers, good luck with all this stuff that I'm giving you? You know, the Sermon on the Mount, I'm laying it out for you. Good luck following it. I know not everybody's going to do it. Only a few of you are actually going to be able to do this. Good luck to the rest of you guys. You're on your own. Only a few can make it. You know, is Jesus like the scary professors in movies where, you know, stands up on the first day of class in college and tells their students, everybody look to your left, now look to your right. By the end of this semester, one of those students is going to fail or drop out, because only a few can pass my class. Is that what Jesus said? Is that what he's saying here? You know, this kind of statement coming from Jesus might catch some of us off guard. You know, it's not something that we might associate with him. But I don't think that this kind of phrasing of wide and narrow gates would have been very shocking to his first century listeners. Because Jesus, he's really just echoing this theme that's found throughout the Old Testament. The Old Testament in Jewish literature is filled with this image of two paths. One for the righteous, which leads to life, and one for the wicked, which leads to death and destruction. And we see this in Deuteronomy 30. We see this in the law, where God tells the Israelites, I have set before you life and death, blessings and curses. Now choose life. And we see this again coming up in Psalm 1, where the psalmist writes, For the Lord watches over the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked leads to destruction. And again in the prophets, Jeremiah 21 says, This is what the Lord says. See, I am setting before you the way of life and the way of death. The way of life, the way of death. This theme gets repeated throughout the Old Testament. So when Jesus says that there is a wide and narrow gate, one leads to life, one leads to death, he's really just riffing off of this old school Jewish tradition that had been around for centuries. He isn't telling his followers anything that they hadn't already heard before. And for some of us, it might be the same thing. This kind of thinking might be very familiar. It might be something that you remember growing up hearing in Sunday school, that there's a good way to live, and Jesus wants you to live a good way and be a good person. And there's a bad way to live, and you shouldn't live that way. That's for sinners who don't hear the bad things. And it's way too easy for us to break the Bible down into this sort of form. It's very easy to do it. Be good like Abraham. He had faith and he followed God. Don't be bad like Lot. He followed the wrong path. He only thought of himself. Be brave like Esther. She trusted God and she stood up for her people. Be good like her. Follow that path. Don't be bad like Haman. He was envious and a schemer. There's a good way. There's a bad way. We do this with Jesus as well, saying, be good and gracious and loving like Jesus. Don't be judgmental and a rule-following stickler like the Pharisees. There's a good way and there's a bad way. And this is how a lot of religious people end up seeing the Bible, as a book of great moral examples for us to follow, that we should try to be like these people. We should try to emulate the good people that we read about in the Bible. Our goal should be to imitate the good and to avoid the bad decisions that the bad people make. And we should stick to the narrow path and avoid the wide path. This isn't unique just to religious cultures either. If we take a step back and we look at the broader culture around us, we see that this kind of thinking, that there's a good way and a bad way, a right way and a wrong way, isn't just exclusive to religious people. Non-religious people do the same thing, just with different stories and different examples. For instance, people will say things like, be nice like Mr. Rogers. He was very kind. You should be good like him. Don't be bad like a mean person. Don't do that. Or be a good listener like Oprah. She helps people with their problems. Don't be somebody who causes problems for other people. And there are plenty of children's books that echo the same kind of message. A few weeks ago, my wife and I were shopping in Target. We were looking for a children's book for her cousin's birthday party coming up. And I saw one that was titled Woke Baby. And when I saw it, I chuckled and I had to stop and read the back. And the back says that woke babies are up early. Woke babies, they raise their fists in the air. Woke babies, they cry out for justice. Woke babies grow up to change the world. We put this pressure on babies. Be a woke baby. Be a good baby. Don't be a bad baby. Whether somebody's religious or not, I think that at the end of the day, most of us can agree on what is right and what is wrong about 90% of the time. Religious people and non-religious people, I think, can agree that we should seek for peace, that we should be kind, that we should be brave, that there is some of these good things, and we should try to seek justice and be creative, and we shouldn't be judgmental and selfish, and we shouldn't be cowardly and mean. But my question to both groups, the religious groups and the non-religious groups, is the same. Is what do you do when you don't live up to those standards? What do you do when you make a mistake? What do you do when you value honesty? You think that that's the right way to live, that's the good way to go. You value honesty, but then you find yourself fudging the truth to your friends and your coworkers so that you don't look so bad. What do you do when you end up going down the wrong way? And what do you do if you think that other people should control their tempers, but you find yourself going off on somebody in a fit of rage, whether it's the driver who just cut you off on the highway, or when you come home from work after a long, long day, and you see that nobody has done anything to prepare for dinner, leaving it all up to you to do again, and then you blow up in a fit of rage, even though you expect other people to control your tempers. What do you do when you don't live up to the standards that you hold for yourself? And what if you aren't brave enough, or creative enough? Or what if you're a baby and you're not woke enough? What do you do in those situations? No matter what your version of what the right path looks like, how do you get back on track when you seem to have fallen into a wrong way of living? And let's face it, I don't think I need to convince you all that this applies to all of us. That all of us make mistakes and that none of us are perfect. None of us walk the straight and narrow path 100% of the time. I think there are two options that most of us take when we find ourselves falling off the right path onto the wrong path, when we want to get back onto the good way. One is we try really, really hard not to make that mistake again, and maybe we do a couple extra good things to make up for it. Some might call this the moralistic approach. It stresses really high moral standards, but I want to call it the Marines approach. This is the approach that says we're going to buckle down and we're going to face this problem with discipline and hard work, and this is for the few and the proud. We're going to do it by the strength of our own moral ability. Or there's the other option that people will often go to. Instead of raising the standards and trying to reach these, you adjust the standards. You try to convince yourself and others that you really aren't as bad, and that your brokenness really isn't that big of a deal. Some might call this the relativist approach. This is the approach that says, hey, at least I'm not as bad as that guy over there. It's all relative. My mistake is it could have been a lot worse. Let's just keep that in mind. We can just chill. We don't have to really stress about this really high moral standard that I didn't live up to. Hey, at least I didn't kill anybody. At least I didn't do this. Both of these approaches, the moralistic Marines approach and this relativistic sort of chill out man approach, both of them are ways that we deal with our mistakes and imperfections, and they might actually work for a little bit. That they might work for a stretch of time. But let's look at how they play out as time goes on in real life. How do these things affect us and the people around us? With the Marines approach, the moralistic approach, you might be able to find success for a bit. You might be able to white knuckle your way through a few weeks or maybe months of really righteous living, always doing the right thing and sticking to the straight and narrow path. But eventually this approach will run you into the ground. It is exhausting. It simply isn't a sustainable way to approach life. This approach lets your inner critic take control of your life, and our inner critics show no mercy. You will beat yourself up every single time you fall short. And you will end up using your high moral standards like a club on the people around you, trying to bash them into a living a moral life like you are. And at the end of the day, you and your friends and your family will end up hurt by your rigid approach to living a good life. And with the relativist approach, you might be able to avoid the negative feelings that come with failure by comparing yourself to people who have done worse, or by saying that things could have been a lot worse than they really are. But eventually, if this is your approach, you end up losing touch with reality. You start telling yourself a story that makes you look like the good guy. But that's only because you are skipping over all of the ugly parts. This approach doesn't even try to address the real mistakes and character flaws that each of us has. It just minimizes them, or points the finger somewhere else. This approach doesn't even try to change. It simply tries to relabel the wide path as the narrow path. You end up trying to convince yourself that things aren't as bad as they really are, when really, you've strayed miles away from where you really wanted to be. Both of these approaches lead us to dead ends. Neither of them can bring us to where we want to go. No matter how hard we try to follow the narrow path, we will eventually run out of steam and fall off course. And if we have these high moral standards, we will only end up beating ourselves up. And if we try relabeling the broad path as narrow, eventually the truth will catch up to us, and there's no way that we can make our way back. And so we find ourselves stuck. We arrive at this impasse with no way out. Neither option gives us a roadmap to where we want to go. And I think that's exactly what Jesus wanted to happen when he told his disciples this. I think this is what he was doing the whole time. He was using this language of wide and narrow gates and broad paths to help us see how impossible our position really is. He's doing this throughout the entire Sermon on the Mount, which this passage is just a short part of. He's showing everyone how high the standards really are if we want to live a good life. And by doing this, he's showing us how badly we need someone else to step in on our behalf. For example, there's a verse in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus actually says, "Be perfect as your heavenly Father is perfect." That's the standard. If anybody thinks that they can reach that standard on their own, they are joking themselves. And that's what Jesus wants us to realize. It's exactly like what Paul said in the passage we read from Romans, that no one will be declared righteous in God's sight by the works of the law. Rather, through the law, we become conscious of our sin. Through the law, we just become aware of how much we have fallen from those standards. Because of Jesus' words, we just become aware of how far we are from perfection. And the law and the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus' words here, are accomplishing the same thing. They make us aware of how badly we need someone else to bring us through the narrow gate, because we cannot get there on our own. Because clearly you can't earn the title of good person by the rigid Marines moralistic approach, so only leave you stressed out, burnt out, and the people around you hurt. And clearly you can't just relabel yourself a good person because that's what you want to do. This is just dishonest. And eventually the truth will come out. You cannot hide these things forever. But this title, the title of good and righteous person, can be given to you by somebody who actually has earned it. Someone who can honestly be called good and righteous and ethical and peace-loving and perfect. And that's what Jesus offers every single one of us. He offers us the title of good and righteous person freely because he earned it fair and square. And because he earned it, he can give it to us freely by grace. It's as if Jesus is saying to us that I will make you right. Even though you're not right now, I will make you right. There have always been two paths. And even though you've wandered for years down the wrong road, heading towards death and destruction, I have gone through the wide gate and down the broad path to find you. And I have taken that death and destruction on myself so that you can enter through the narrow gate and follow the path that leads to life. It turns out that the narrow gate Jesus is talking about is a lot like the justification that Paul brings up later in Romans 3, where he writes, "For all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God, and all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Christ Jesus." All are justified freely. In this context, he's using a legal term. It's the Greek word dikaio, which means to acquit. It's a legal term that you would use in a court of law to declare somebody not guilty. But it also can be used to declare somebody righteous. It has everything to do with status, with your standing before the law. And by God's free gift of grace, we can enjoy the status of a righteous person, even though we haven't earned it. That's the good news of the gospel. There are some airlines out there that might let you enjoy first-class status if you are traveling with one of their loyalty customers, somebody really important, even though you haven't earned it. Because you're traveling with this important person, you get all the benefits: the free food and drinks, the extra legroom, the free movies and entertainment, even though you didn't do anything to earn it. I'm still waiting to find a really important person to travel with. I can experience that someday. It'd be really nice, but we'll see. If I fly Southwest, and that doesn't have first class. In the same way, though, Jesus allows us to enjoy all of the benefits that he has earned because we are with him. We get to enjoy all the benefits of Christ's righteousness simply because he has made us his traveling companion. Now, it's more than that. He calls us his own. He makes us his family. And how many more benefits do you get for that for being the son of God's family. I mean, that's incredible. We aren't good people because of what we have earned. Or because we've successfully changed the rating system. We are declared good people, righteous people before God, because Jesus has shared his status with us. He has stamped us as good. He has labeled God's people as righteous, even though we don't deserve it. And that's what makes the message of the wide and narrow gates good news to us. It doesn't have to be something that scares us into wondering, are we one of the few who will make it through the narrow gate? Because when we take a step back and we look at where Jesus places the gate in this story, we see that it's at the beginning of the path. Whenever I heard this passage, I used to think, in my head, I imagined this long path up this really steep mountainside with all sorts of treacherous obstacles. And the Christian life was supposed to be your way of making it up this path. And then at the top, there would be this gate. And somebody would be there, and they would inspect you at the end to see, like, did you do this right? Did you do all the right things? Do you deserve to get in through this gate? If you did it really well, then maybe you'd be able to get in, but only a few would be able to get in. But that's not what Jesus is saying. He says, enter through the narrow gate. And he says, small is the gate and narrow is the path that leads to life. The gate actually is at the beginning of the path. It's not at the end of the path. And the gate is open to us now because Jesus has opened it for us. When we are justified now, we can be declared righteous. We can walk through the gate now because of what Jesus has done. We don't need to worry anymore. We don't need to lower the standards or lie to ourselves. We don't need to try to work our butts off to earn our way through the gate. The truth is that we are declared good and righteous now because someone else has earned it for us. And because of that, we can step through the gate with confidence, knowing that Jesus has earned our place in there. Which leads us here to the doorstep of the gate. And I want us to look at three elements of what it means to walk through and what's on the other side before we close. One, we enter the gate by faith. Now, what does that really mean? I grew up thinking that faith meant believing really, really, really hard. That there'd be somebody at the gate checking, hey, does this person have enough faith? I don't know. Maybe we can let him in. But actually, faith is a lot simpler than that. Faith just means letting go. Really, that's it. It means that we let go of all the good deeds and the righteous things that we do to try to cover up our guilt and our mistakes and prove that we're worthy to enter in. Faith means letting that go because we believe that Jesus' righteousness is good enough for us. We don't need to earn our way. We can stop living as if we need to. Faith means accepting that Jesus has already opened the door for us. And actually, the church does something to recognize this, and it's called baptism. Baptism is a sign that whoever you are, whether an infant, a teenager, or an adult, you are declared righteous because of what Jesus has done for you, not because of what you've done for yourself. Now, faith just means living as if that message of baptism is true. Now, faith just means that we stop trying to earn our way into the gate, and we simply walk through with the faith that Jesus has done it all for us. Number two, we cannot enter the gate with our pride and our ego intact. In faith, we not only let go of our good deeds, but we also let go of the pride that we get from pointing to our good deeds, saying how good we are, and how much we've done. Aren't we worthy to enter through this gate? No, you cannot enter through the gate with an inflated head and a big ego. If we think that we can just waltz in because we deserve it, we'll bang our big heads on the doorpost. Because the gate is too narrow for our pride and our ego. It's simply that true. We have to let those things go. We need to humble ourselves, shrink ourselves, and let the air out of our big, overinflated head. And this is somewhat of a side note. While the gate is too narrow for our pride and our ego, the gate is actually wide enough for all people, for all cultures, for every language, every race, every single human culture on this earth can fit through God's wide and loving grace, yet it's still too narrow for our pride and our ego. And the gospel has a funny way of breaking down our pride and our ego. When we hear the gospel message, it shrinks us back to normal human size. It reminds us that every good thing that we have is a gift, and we can't take credit for it. How can you be proud of something that you can't take credit for? How can you be proud of something that somebody else has given to you? You can't. So when we hear the gospel message, when we look to Jesus and see all that he has done for us, we don't have pride in ourselves. We have gratitude for what he's done for us. So slowly our pride and our ego shrinks away as we take on the free gift of grace that God has given us, allowing us to walk in through the gate unencumbered. And three, the last thing about this gate is that it's not the end of the journey, it's the beginning. The path doesn't even start until we step through the gate. And one of the unique and exciting things about this journey that lies ahead of us is that it's this adventure in personal transformation. This journey changes us. In a surprising reversal, God ends up declaring us righteous at the beginning of the journey, and then making us righteous as we walk along the path. As we follow this path, we become more and more like Christ. As we walk in step with him along this journey, we move further and further away from the pride and the shame and the resentments that used to define us. And we move closer and closer to the humble and loving and joyful people that God has always intended us to be. We become more patient along this journey. We become kinder and gentler. We become more forgiving and less judgmental because we see how much we've been forgiven and how much we deserved judgment, and yet we were given grace. With every step we follow Christ down this path, we become more and more like the beautiful image of God, which has always been inside us from the moment we were born. So sisters and brothers, I just want to give you some peace, knowing that you are already through the gate because of what Jesus has done for you. You do not need to worry anymore. And what a journey we get to walk together as God's people who follow Christ down the path that is in front of us. Let us pray. Heavenly Father, you have opened the door for us to walk through. And if we are still holding on to our pride and our ego and this need to earn our way through, help us to let that go. Silence our inner critic that keeps telling us that we're not good enough, and your voice tells us that we are good enough. Because you have earned our place through the gate. You have opened it up because you are perfect and good and righteous. Help us to let go of all of our baggage, our fears, our shames, our guilt, and simply hold on to the grace that you give to us freely.